Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Sunday for Sunday, October 10th, 2021. We've got another great show for you this week, and I'm joined by members of the media, academia, and financial services as we analyze all the news that transpired in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. So sit back, relax, enjoy this episode of BRN Sunday. We're going to kick things off with a look at what is happening on Capitol Hill a lot these days. And joining us, he's one half of the Legal Eagles, and we also know him as Kevin Walsh, a principal with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in good old Washington, D.C. Kevin, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
It's always good talking to you, Jeff, and it's always good talking to listeners. And I think the key is that, as the weather begins to cool down, the action in D.C. tends to heat up. And right now there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in D.C. that I think we can at least briefly chat about this morning.
Yeah, let's talk about the confirmation hearing for Lisa Gomez for the head of EBSA, the Employee Benefit Security Administration. What do you have for us there?
Yeah, so this is a very significant step in terms of, having the administration put its leadership in place to run, the Employee Benefit Security Administration, which is the agency within the Department of Labor that really regulates the retirement space. And right now, the agency is being run by Ali Kawar, who is he's in the long term, he's going to be the Deputy Assistant Secretary. And right now, he's the Acting Assistant Secretary. And what makes him unique, as opposed to others who've kind of had that position before, is that prior to accepting his political role, Ali Kawar was already at the agency as a career official. So right now we have, as you mentioned, President Biden has nominated Lisa Gomez, who's a labor lawyer from New York, to act as the head of the agency. And in order for her to do that, she has to go through a Senate confirmation process. And this week and yesterday and Thursday, really kicked off the start of that process, where she appeared before the Senate Health Committee and answered questions for a number of hours. And we would expect that, the next step will be the passage of some time. And then by the end of the year, she'll be confirmed by the full Senate.
Wow. So it takes that long to interview somebody? Boy, that's certainly worse than the private sector.
Well, I don't know if it's the interviews that take that long. I think some of it is the floor calendar in the Senate. They're trying to do a lot of things in not a lot of time. And for example, one of the things they're working on is raising the debt ceiling, and that took up a significant chunk of time this week.
Yeah, I was just, I guess, more kidding, I guess, in that regard. All right,
I got it.
Yeah, let's. Do you want to talk about?
Do you want to pivot to a regulatory topic?
Yes, yes. You caught me off guard. Yes.
Yeah, let's pivot to the regulatory agenda. And, we've talked about ESG and we've said, it's coming. And I think we're still at that point where we're going to say, new rules related to ESG and proxy voting are coming. And they're at this point, they're going to be here really soon. So, in recent weeks, we've been wondering, why has it taken so long for the White House to sign off on, rules that the Department of Labor has proposed that would overhaul the Trump era ESG and proxy voting rules. And we still don't know why it's taking so long. But what we do know is that the White House has completed its review. On Thursday morning, the OMB website was updated to, let viewers know that the ESG and proxy voting rule had cleared regulatory review. You can get a couple of other details from that. So one thing to note is that it was consistent with change, which tells you that, changes were made between the time that it was submitted to the White House and what the final product is. So that suggests that there may have been the politicals of the White House may have viewed it as a rule that needed kind of more massaging or more, to pivot a little bit. But there's not much time left to speculate. So I think at this point, the exciting thing is that we'll see that rule, by the early half of this week.
And Kevin, is that something that gets, just for my own and the audience's edification, is that something that gets, so when it gets published, is it published for a comment period, or does it get published in the Federal Register? Just walk me through that process, so I and me and the audience for that process.
So what will happen is it will be published in the Federal Register as a proposed rule. There in all likelihood will be a comment period, either 30, 60, or 90 days. And it's going to be important, for anyone who's involved in the retirement space to, take a look at the rule when it comes out, because rules relating to how people can invest their retirement assets or how they get invested are a big deal. And to, thoughtfully provide comments for how the rule can be improved, or if it's a great rule, just, saying that, the rule makes sense. But there will be an opportunity to comment.
Yeah, and that's going to be really interesting. I think, setting aside the proxy piece for a second, ESG, that's something that I know you and David and the team at Groom, I mean, you're talking about some of these concerns around ESG with clients, right? I mean, and your clients are not just plan sponsors, employers, but they're also record keepers and other entities around the ecosystem. So I have to think this is kind of a big movement. Not to put words in your mouth, but I would say this is a leap forward.
Well, I mean, again, I think this rule will have a significant impact. And, some of this, again, is from what you can glean from website. And it's just total nerd here, but they've classified it as a major rule. And they've classified it as having a significant economic impact. So what that tells me is that they anticipate that this rule will have, more than $100 million of change to the after it comes out. So to me, it signals that they're not just making tweaks to the system, that they might make some significant changes in how fiduciaries evaluate investments that may have an environmental, social, or governance component.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, I don't know how you guys. I mean, it's like waiting with bated breath, right? I mean, it's like anticipating the next Star Wars movie or the Mandalorian season 3 or something like that, right, Kevin? I mean,
like the new season of Ted Lasso. Yeah, I mean, you're just hoping that it comes back soon.
It's just exciting for us retirement nerds. Well, Kevin, we're going to leave it there. Really appreciate you stopping by. I know how busy you are, and appreciate you giving the audience a look-see into what's happening in Washington, D.C.
It's always good being on the show, Jeff. Thanks.
Thanks, buddy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Welcome back, and now we're going to take a look at technology, consumer products, and a lot more. We're even going to talk privacy. Joining us on the line, he is executive producer and lead advisor for 7 Investing. We're talking about Daniel Klein. Dan, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Good morning, Jeff. Hard to believe we are nearing Halloween as it goes here.
Yes, and it's spooky here in Charlotte. The clouds are here. It's very I don't know, not a nice, very nice day. Hopefully we don't get a lot of rain this weekend. But Dan, a lot of spookiness when it comes to privacy and deleting information. And I know you wanted to talk about Apple's new requirement for apps on the App Store about deleting your account.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about all the evil things companies do, all the ways, Apple takes this percentage, they strong arm companies. We don't talk about when they do something positive. In this case, Apple has basically gone to all the app providers in the App Store and said, hey, you have to make it so that when someone wants to delete an app, they can also delete their account within the app. And this actually surprised me because, Jeff, did you know, and it's very easy to delete something on your iPhone. You basically just hold a couple of buttons. There's an X, you click on the X and it deletes the app. But that does not delete your account. So, you're on some website, something you tried, maybe you didn't like it. That company still has your information. In many cases, that's harmless. You're just going to get email. And in other cases, that can be, let's call it annoying, or maybe even in some ways, detrimental. Apple wants it. So instead of and not every company does this. Many companies make it so it's very easy to delete an account. But some of the more nefarious ones would make it so you have to go to a web form or you have to send a specific email. And Apple is saying, nope, you can't do that. You have to make it easy to delete your account within that app. And it sounds like a small thing, but I actually think it's really like a very customer-friendly move. Again, Apple doesn't have to make customer-friendly moves. They're in a pretty dominant position. So antagonizing some of the companies in the App Store, and sure, Apple can do it in a way that other companies can't, but it's still, I don't know, to me, it's corporate responsibility, and we haven't seen a lot of that in big tech, so I'm happy for Apple for doing it.
Dan, what do you think was the genesis? I mean, is it all this stuff that we see, the breaches, the sharing of data, the selling of data? I mean, we did a show earlier this week. I'm not sure if you caught it because you're busy doing your shows, but we did a show with Consumer Reports about credit apps that have hidden costs and fees, and one of those costs, by the way, data. So, what do you think kind of started this for Apple?
Yeah, I think Apple's looking for public relations wins wherever it can get them. So if Apple is going to fight the battle of not wanting to change its own policies on taking a 30% cut or some of the other financial policies that maybe consumers don't like, maybe other companies push back on,
Mm-hmm.
why not change something that every person in the public is going to like? And the reality is the apps that aren't going to like it are probably not the very credible apps. They're probably the somewhat shadier ones in the first place. So, and the larger apps, if I decide to delete Facebook on my iPhone, as I know my wife has, but she still has a Facebook account, she just doesn't want to see it on her phone. So she wouldn't actually need to delete her account. So I just think this is Apple examining all its policies and deciding, let's be a good citizen where it doesn't hurt us to be a good citizen. And I apologize if that's a very cynical view of how things are done, but I think that's probably the reality.
Yeah, and Dan, let's kind of carry this over a little bit to Facebook. We have talked about misinformation, disinformation, however you want to term it. Facebook really, and we had not planned this before the show in the green room, so I apologize for hitting you with this. But I know you're going to have an opinion because you have opinion on a lot of good opinions and a lot of interesting topics. Let's talk a little bit about Facebook. And there was a Senate confirmation, or Senate not confirmation, a hearing this week about with a whistleblower, and I want to talk about these just in broad terms, these social media platforms and the concern there about the damage it can do to the mental health of you and I and young people.
Yeah, I think this is overplayed. And I actually posted on Twitter this week. And I'm not downplaying that obviously young people, there's bullying on social media, there's all sorts of negatives. But people our age, so many people, you remember last week there was a Facebook outage for a few hours? And the overriding Twitter theme was, oh, everyone's so productive now, and why would we go back to Facebook? And I just posted a list of all the positive things I do on Facebook. And could there be a negative thing on Facebook? Sure. But Facebook is pictures of my cats and pictures of me on vacation and keeping in touch with people from high school and meeting new friends or talking to people I met on cruise ships or whatever it might be. So you control that narrative. Now, that might not be true if you're a 17-year-old in high school. So I do think this gets overplayed, but I think there needs to be regulation. But that regulation cannot come from Congress. We saw, and we've seen it over and over, just how incompetent, and this is not a political issue, this is bipartisan, how inept a bunch of old men are when it comes to talking about these. We all watch Richard Blumenthal, who I've interviewed a handful of times and am not a fan of, just very arrogant, come out and not understand what a fake Instagram account was and how that's not something the company controls and it's not a product. And I don't want to pick on Blumenthal because you could pick on like 75 others. So I've talked about this for a long time. If you're going to have regulation, it either needs to be a group like the FCC where you try to pick impartial bipartisan people that have true knowledge. I'm not a big fan of that approach because the FCC has not worked overly well over the years. I prefer an OSHA-like approach, and I don't understand why the industry isn't being preemptive in doing this, where all of big tech puts a rep on a board and they come up with best practices. They come up with rules. It's not fun. My family has had to change how we manufacture things because of changes to OSHA standards, and those changes might have been initiated by my dad because you're trying to do things in the best interest of the public. So I do think there needs to be regulation, but anybody who's watched a congressional hearing knows that that's simply not a body that's capable of doing it. And it's not a body that's capable of being apolitical. And this has to not be about politics. It has to be about figuring out what the right thing is.
So Dan, you just reminded me of the Eminem lyrics. So the FCC won't let me be or let me be me. So let's see. Dan, let's talk about. Interesting how I brought the Eminem into here. Dan, let's talk about streaming real quick. We covered a story with you, I don't know, a couple weeks ago about Black Widow. And if you recall the story, I'm sure you do, but the audience may not, that Scarlett Johansson was a little upset because they went direct to Disney Plus to release or they did it in concert with a
Yeah, it was a paid extra. It was a
yeah.
$30 add-on to your Disney Plus. So not only did you need Disney Plus, you needed to pay $30. That's actually, as of I think today, no longer true. You can watch Black Widow on Disney Plus.
Well, that's good to know. But the key here is that Scarlett Johansson, I'm talking about the contract, and she's an actress and she gets paid based on box office, but
Yeah,
finally they've settled that and they
she had a
renegotiated
very
that.
specific guarantee in her contract of a box office release and a direct cut. So not a Hollywood accounting cut. I mean, we don't know the actual contract, but let's assume that film makes $500. She's supposed to get a 10% bonus. That's $50 million. I'm being very simplistic there. When the movie was released to Disney Plus, it was very unclear because it becomes muddy. One, did Disney even contractually have the right to do that? Technically, they didn't. Two, should she only get a share of that $30 that people pay? Or what about any new subscriptions in that period? Are those caused by Black Widow? So here's the thing. Disney should have gone to her well before the movie came out and made a deal. This never should have gone public because it made Disney look bad. It made it look like Disney was treating basically its only female Avenger poorly. And there were rumors of other lawsuits the woman who starred in Cruella, and I didn't see that movie, so her name is escaping me. And hopefully Disney has settled those things. And look, I think this comes down to, I'm not sure Bob Chapek is as good at his job as Bob Iger was. And that doesn't mean he can't grow into it, but this was a company that was legendarily good with talent. I mean, you've seen all of the Marvel stars do very, very long arcs with their characters. That's absolutely crucial to the Disney ethos, and that's something where we've seen Bob Chapek make some steps. Now, that said, I'll give him credit. He fixed it. They made this deal. They've re-announced that they're going to do Tower of Terror with Scarlett Johansson. They're basically left with Disney World Restroom the Ride after that, because they've made movies based on pretty much every piece of Disney park, intellectual property. But this was clumsy. I'm glad they worked it out, but we never should have heard about this. This all should have been behind the scenes.
Well, there he is, folks. Dan Klein has a lot of opinions, and you heard some of them there. Dan, always a pleasure chatting with you, and great analysis as always, and we look forward to having you back on the program again next week.
I'll see you next week.
Welcome back. Now we're going to shift gears, talk a little real estate. Joining us on the line, he is the real estate journalist, reporter for Market Watch, and we're talking about Jacob Passy. JP, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Glad to be here.
So normally when we talk to you, Jacob, we talk about residential real estate, but today we're going to talk about something a little bit different, and that is commercial real estate, specifically Tesla relocating its headquarters from the Bay Area to Austin, Texas. What can you tell us there?
Yeah, so, it's kind of a hybrid between the two. No pun intended, although they don't make hybrids, they make electric vehicles. Anyway,
that was good. That was cute. That was cute. I like that.
They're relocating their commercial real estate, and one of the big reasons they cited is actually housing prices. So in his speech before investors, sorry for the traffic noise here in New York. In his speech before investors during the annual meeting, Tesla CEO Elon Musk, he announced that they are going to be moving their headquarters from where they are now in California and the Bay Area, Silicon Valley kind of region, to Austin, Texas. They're not abandoning California entirely. They will still have a presence there, and they will continue to grow that presence, but they are going to make their headquarters be located in Austin. And what he said was that, housing was an issue. He talked about how home prices are really high in, San Francisco, San Jose, that region. Mm-hmm. And that as a result, he talked about how workers were being forced to travel many hours, have very long commutes to find affordable housing. We've talked about this before, about how people are moving, as far as Sacramento, and, really far, like we're talking like hour and a half, 2 hour drive out of, San Francisco, Bay Area, or Silicon Valley to find homes they can afford to purchase or even rent in some cases. And so in order to scale up their operations, he basically said, they needed to relocate because it was too hard to, manage building a bigger company in an area where real estate was so expensive. And so he, like many people, turned to Austin, Texas. And so what I looked at was how, this is not, Tesla is far from the first company to do something like this. And, we've seen for years now a massive amount of out-migration from California to other parts of the country. And Texas, in particular, is one of the most popular places for people to go. And, generally speaking, Texas is still much more affordable than San Francisco or San Jose are. But in the past year, especially, things have gotten really crazy in the Texas real estate market. And in fact, a recent report not too long ago from the National Association of Realtors found that over the past year, home prices in Austin have risen 45%. And it was number 2 in the country behind Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which is in the Berkshires. So that's kind of a different story there. That's, a vacation destination. So it's probably lots of people from, New York City buying, vacation homes to get out of the city during COVID. But Austin's market in particular has exploded. Other data points, Realtor.com, their data, shows that 46% of people shopping for a home in Austin were from elsewhere. So that could be other parts of Texas or other parts of the country like California. So, Austin is seeing this massive increase in demand, largely because of people moving there from other parts of the country. And one reason why Texas is popular with people like Elon Musk is, from a policy perspective, it's a pretty great state to do business in, affordable from a tax perspective and all that. But when it comes to building, they have very business-friendly regulations and things like that make it really easy, especially for homes, make it really easy to build homes. And that's one reason why Texas, despite the fact that the state's population has grown considerably, in recent years, has managed to continue to be very affordable compared to California, is because of regulation. In Texas, it's very easy to build homes, whereas in California, it's very hard to build homes. There's a lot of red tape in California preventing the development of new housing, where that red tape does not exist to the same extent in Texas. And so that's long been a reason why Texas has been more popular, and it's why home prices there are still so much more affordable. Even though they've risen 45% over the past year, the median price for a home in Austin is only $500,000. I say only $500,000 because compared to the Bay Area, that is, in San Francisco, the median price is like around 1.4 million. In San Jose, it's around 1.7 million. So, when you look at that, it is significantly more affordable, but it's rising really quickly. And, when you talk to home builders and folks in that side of the industry, they say that, sort of the supply chain problems we're seeing around the country are true of, Austin too. Yes, it is easier to build housing to get the permit, perhaps, but then you're dealing with the issues related to the lack of labor, lack of lumber, and other supplies. And all those factors mean that, Austin has not managed to keep pace, and other cities in Texas too have not managed to keep, even though they are among the top builders of homes in the country. They're 3 of the top 5 markets for the most new homes built are located in Texas, including Austin. Even then, they are still not able to keep up with this huge, swarm of people descending on Texas. So, it shows how the dynamics of the real estate market are really complex right now. And that makes it really hard for buyers to navigate all that.
Yeah. And I mean, I understand the business-friendly nature, but if everyone's moving out of California, not everyone, but a lot of people moving out into Austin, Texas, they're going to be driving up home prices, as you said. They've gone up significantly. Doesn't that just make things less affordable unless they're able to? And right, the point is they can build, I guess, a little bit more freely than they can in California. But I have to think that the same problem that has happened in parts of California would then transpire in Texas. And does California really want to lose that tax revenue of people living there? I mean, that's significant revenue, high earners, tax revenue to the state, right? I mean, that's how that economic picture works. Now they're all flowing to Texas and probably other places. But it seems to me like that migration of people only just drives the cost up. And I think it's the key is where do you go? Where's the next big place to go so that you can take advantage of real estate investing?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, that's always the kind of, that's what I think a lot of people are worried about right now. And when you go, like I was in Austin for a conference right before COVID started. And I remember, I was, every Uber I took, inevitably, the subject of a conversation between me and the Uber driver or Lyft driver was, them complaining about how expensive housing had gotten. Because a lot of them were native to the region. They had grown up and lived their whole lives in Austin. And they were saying, all these people moving from out of state or out of town in other parts of Texas have made it really, they were like talking about how they couldn't afford to live in Austin anymore. And so, it's all relative. From the perspective of someone moving from California to Austin, it's still a steal. They're basically getting a home for cents on the dollar compared to where they're coming from. But if you are a renter, rental rates have also gone up. They've gone up. I think the data from Realtor.com showed that rent rates in Austin have gone up about like 20% over the past year. So, when you think of people who were living in Austin before this housing boom, even before this past year, their rent could have gone up as much as 20%. And then when you factor that into, presumably their wages have not gone up 20%. And we see inflation in lots of other aspects of our lives right now. It makes it that much more difficult to buy a home. And so, it's all relative. If you're someone who already owned a home in Austin, you're great. You've seen your wealth grow substantially. If you're someone who's moving from, California, you're pretty well off because you're probably, especially if you're selling a home in California to then move to Austin, you're getting, a bargain comparatively. Or even if you're a renter, perhaps you haven't been managed to save, $100,000, $200,000 for a down payment for a home in San Francisco or San Jose. But that, could easily be enough. What you save might easily be enough for a home in Texas. So, but as far as, the next markets, I mean, we've seen, you and I have talked about places like Boise, Idaho have, seen some of the same trend of people from California. North Carolina is another region that a lot of people talk about being kind of like the next big place for this type of activity, especially in the Research Triangle area in North Carolina. Then the question becomes, eventually those markets themselves will also get tapped out. And we're also in a situation where a lot of these markets people talk about, like Boise is a great example. That was a very small town. I mean, it was a city, but basically like a small town pretty much before the past few years when suddenly it saw a ton of people moving into the city from California and other, pricey parts of the country because it's, got a great quality of life there, et cetera. But, when you talk to people who live there or talk to people who move there, they mention how, there are growing pains. The city didn't have the infrastructure to support, a massive swelling in its size. And that will be a challenge of some of these smaller markets across the country that could start to see spillover effects from places like Austin that might be growing, too fast or not, have the capacity themselves anymore. If those people start going elsewhere, those markets will then, feel the effects.
Well, I guess I'm going to be renting a RV, I think, is my retirement plan, Jacob. Jacob Passy, always a pleasure chatting with you. Great information, a lot of things for people to consider when they're relocating. Thanks so much for joining us. And look, we look forward to having you back on the program again next week.
Talk soon. Bye-bye. Bye.
Welcome back. Now we're going to take a look at markets, and who better to break down what has happened this week and what could happen the following week. We're talking about Oliver Rennicky is the lead anchor for the TD Ameritrade Network. Oliver, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me as always.
So, it's a pleasure. The pleasure's all ours, and you really are. You're knee deep from markets on the close to morning trade live. You are knee deep in markets 5 days a week. I would actually dare to say 7 days a week because you probably don't stop thinking about this stuff because you're so passionate about it. But give us the.
That's correct.
Let's talk through what we saw this week with the market. I know we had a new jobs report, but give us your TD Ameritrade Network perspective.
Yep. Most important thing this week is the 10-year yield is back at 1.6%. And so it climbed from below 1.5. It was around 1.45 when we came into the week. And right now, despite a top-line miss on employment, we are at the highest 10-year yield since June. That's very important because it suggests that the economy is in a really tricky spot where we do have growth and we have progress made on the employment front. But we are at a very difficult juncture as it pertains to price movement and inflationary forces that are causing the Fed to stay vigilant and give us a tone of hawkishness over the last quarter. And we also see that earnings expectations are slowing and revisions are moving downwards for many company guidances. So the bond market reflects this position that we're in, and with the highest level on the yield since June, it's starting to create a little bit of volatility in the stock market too. And that is kind of the simplest explanation for why folks are seeing their stock trades down and their index ETFs and all that stuff lower over the past month, basically because big tech companies that determine the overall direction are struggling with the concept of higher interest rates and the market overall with the potential for a problematic degree of inflation.
Thanks, Oliver. How do you process this jobs report that came out on Friday? I guess, quote unquote, bad job numbers. Is the market buying into it? What's your sense?
Well, it's tricky because there is a big mismatch in terms of what employers are looking for and who is able or willing to take that job. And as we heard on our show Friday, Neil Dudd at Renaissance Macro attributes much of it to the COVID wave that we had and says that as we see that wave go back down, we should expect people to go back to the workplace, as they have been saying. The biggest reason is health fears. So we're really going to test that thesis. And it's a bit surprising as well to Richard Walquist, who is from the American Staffing Association, who's on our show this afternoon, and also said that he was very surprised and their team was surprised that with the vaccination rate being as high as it is, that people are still choosing not to go into work. And that is unclear then when that's going to resolve, if it hasn't started to trend that way already. But one potential panacea for that is for employers to encourage workers to come back via higher wages, which is inflationary. So we're just at this kind of very uncertain period here that doesn't have a lot of examples in history, doesn't really have a lot of clarity on how it's going to resolve.
Oliver, I mentioned you are bookend the programming every day during the week, but you're also hosting some weekend content. We want to talk a little bit about what the show is and what you're like. I hope you should get paid by the minute. Do you get paid by the minute? I don't know. That'd be kind of cool.
Good idea.
I should float that one.
Good idea.
Float that one up.
I'm doing a weekend trader, which is just assessing the week, recapping things, and just a short show on Fridays to get folks kind of thinking about next week and what happened this week, of course.
And that's available for on demand, so people can go to the TD Ameritrade Network site, and if they can't catch you live, they can download that and make some investment decisions based on your expert analysis and thoughts.
I believe so.
You believe so. I love that. We should have a disclosure that past performance is not indicative of future results. Oliver Rennick, always a pleasure chatting with you, and appreciate you taking time out of your very, very, very busy schedule, and even busier this week. Have a great rest of the weekend, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Welcome back. Now we're going to talk healthcare news, and joining us on the line, she is the healthcare editor for Business Insider. She's also the editor of Dispensed, a regular newsletter that you can find on the Business Insider website. I'm talking about Lydia Ramsey Flanzer. Lydia, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah, so let's talk. What's some of the latest news you and the team at BI are following this week?
Yeah, we actually got a chance to break some news this week. I'm not sure if you caught it, but our reporter, Blake Dodge, she talked to a bunch of folks, former and current employees at Apple, and got a good inside look at what's going on in their healthcare division. Can talk about more about that.
Yeah, I did see that, and I saw her posting on LinkedIn. Really interesting. I guess just to tee it up for the audience, Apple has been, when I think of Apple and healthcare, I think of the Apple Watch, Apple Watch 7.
Mm-hmm.
I think of, don't they have Apple Health Plus, I think, which is a service they're offering. So what's going on in the bowels of One Infinite Loop? Or wherever they're located.
Yeah,
isn't it One Infinite? Isn't it One Infinite?
I think that's right.
Okay.
That's the new headquarters.
That's a new one. That's the one that costs like $1 zillion. It's as much as a stadium. Anyway, go ahead, Lydia. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So you're right. A lot of what Apple's been up to and health have a lot to do with the devices. But one thing that they've been trying to do is make this healthcare a really long-lasting legacy for them. And so to do that, they've been kind of tasking their team with these really broad, big ambitions. No surprise here, right? This is kind of the blueprint we see a lot of times with big tech companies or other outsiders coming into healthcare. And so Blake got inside this company, which is a very hard company to get inside of. It's historically been really hard to get employees to talk. That's starting to change at a company-wide level, but especially in the healthcare group, we found, or Blake found, I should say, a lot of folks who were running into issues. Some people felt like they weren't able to really clearly communicate with leadership there about what was happening and what was coming out of some of the experimentation and some of the pilots they were doing. It all comes back to this idea that they wanted to do some level of care delivery. That is, they have these clinics on site, I think, at One Infinite Loop or whatever, One Apple Way, whatever the name of their address is. And so they have these clinics, and they've been trying to figure out, ways to integrate the watch into that, create some programs, Apple programs that are, going to help people manage their hypertension and manage other kind of chronic conditions in a way that could be useful to, health plans or just even their own employees. So with this kind of big picture planning and ideas, sometimes the results didn't pan out in quite the way I think leaders wanted them to. And so, yeah, that's what Blake digs into, is like what kind of unfolded when issues were brought up and what happened beyond them.
Well, I got to tell you, Lydia, and October 5th marks, I think, it's an anniversary of Steve Jobs. I think the 10th anniversary of Steve Jobs' death. He's one of the founders of, and probably the most famous Apple person. But I got to tell you, when I think of Apple, look what they did with the creation of iTunes and changing the music business, right? And look what they did with the personal computer and the telephone and the iPod, right? I mean, they have really made headway into really reorganizing and changing how we use and how we consume so many different things. So I have no doubt that as an organization, they can be transformational. But sounds like they've hit a little bit of some headwinds.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Apple is the world's most valuable company at the moment. So, whatever they end up doing, if they can kind of pull this together and make something come out of it that changes how we go to the doctor, that's going to be really huge. But yeah, it's as a lot of folks learn in healthcare, it's much easier said than done. Who knew healthcare could be that hard? Well,
yeah, I mean, there's so many, I kind of think it's like an ecosystem with so many different pieces to it, and it's not so easily streamlined as I think we've talked about with the Amazon and J.P. Morgan, and I think it was Berkshire Hathaway, right? And we've talked about that probably ad nauseum. But would there ever be an opportunity, Lydia, where Apple and Amazon might work together? Because I feel like those two companies, one's innovated retail, the other one's innovated just about the way everything else. I mean, could we ever see a collaboration between those two big entities when it comes to healthcare?
I'm no expert on the competitive dynamics between big tech, but if I'm understanding them correctly at a very high level, I don't believe that Apple and Amazon quite see eye to eye in a super friendly way.
Yeah, well, I guess that was wishful thinking. So in terms of like the long-term view, I mean, are they still making? We've got the Apple Watch. I think the new Apple Watch 7 just came out, if I'm not mistaken. I don't buy every Apple device that when it comes out, but I do kind of follow what's going on. But they have really made some inroads, forgetting about the care for a second, the healthcare delivery. They've made inroads in other areas related to healthcare. I mean, and I guess there's still work to be done around whether these devices and the information they provide can actually be consumed by practitioners, right? I mean, if you get all this data about yourself, can a healthcare physician really sift through all that? I guess that's kind of the unknown answer to that question.
Yeah. It's a tricky one because you're right. Like they have been doing so much. The watch is such a key part of their business right now. And they've been adding, we've got a bunch of new features on the watch. There's still bigger ambitions for that. So a lot of it is facing the similar problems to what Blake describes in the piece, but some hasn't, right? Like we're pretty confident about the EKG monitor at this point and things like that. But you're right, transferring it into the medical world is going to be different. And the other thing I'd bring up too is, when it comes to big ambitions that Apple has, another one they've been super secretive about, but seemingly is happening is the car and what they're doing there. And it seems like a lot of what we're seeing in healthcare, a lot of that might be happening in the car space too. So it could just be one of those things where, creating a new business line isn't as simple as, saying you're Apple and you're going to do it, which is true of any company, but especially one as big as Apple. So it's going to take some hiccups.
It's going to take hiccups, take hiccups running into the wall and adjusting, adapting. I'd be remiss, Lydia, if I didn't ask you if there's an update on COVID vaccines. Geez, I mean, not a day goes by where there's not some type of news related to this pandemic. Any developments there with respect to vaccines, boosters, efficacy, new drugs?
Not too much on the vaccine front in the past couple of weeks since we last chatted. But it does seem like 5 to 11-year-olds are going to get authorization probably in the next couple of weeks, which will be something to keep an eye out for. But the biggest development that I've been kind of surprised about is that we've seen some antiviral success. So these are pills you'd be able to take once you are diagnosed with COVID. There's some skepticism about how well they're going to work in practice because you have to kind of test early and really catch it on the early end to have really a big benefit. But Merck last week came out with this data showing that they were able to pretty significantly drop hospitalizations in people who took this antiviral pill they have. So that's pretty encouraging. Just another tool, much easier than the antibody treatments that require long-term infusions. If we just had a pill that we could take after getting sick, that would be a really big help for ending the pandemic.
Yeah, I'd like to take a pill for a lot of different things, a lot of different ailments that I have to say. Well, Lydia, always great chatting with you. Thanks so much for bringing the news in healthcare to us. And thanks to Blake Dodge for cracking the Apple armor a little bit and getting some inside scoop. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. And that wraps up this episode of BRN Sunday. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.